social D theater who I'm talking with, so you have some insight. Because sometimes it's the people in the background who really are making things happen. And Thom Jones, even though he is the director of voice and speech at Brown University and also with the Trinity Rep, their MFA, but you are also dialect, speech, text. You do that with all kind of theaters and movies.
Yeah.
Work with some incredible individuals. I wrote some of this down. Nicole Kidman,
Yeah.
Vanessa Redgrave, Jennifer Hudson, Forrest Whitaker, Mary J. Blige, Alan Rickman, Audra McDonald, Mel Gibson. You've worked with directors like Steven Spielberg, Martin Scorsese, Lee
Yeah.
Daniels, Ridley Scott, and the list goes on and on and on and on.
Yeah,
So,
where'd you
yeah,
find all
you
that?
man.
Yeah.
To me, it's like,
Um,
and I gotta say, he's worked with Hassan El-Amin as well.
yeah, that's right. Right. And I was just talking about you this morning with Annie Scaria, who's a member of the company at Trinity. And I said I was going to have a visit with you. I said, you remember Hassan? And she was trying to remember you. And I said, he played Kent in that production of King Lear that Trinity and Dallas Theater Center did together, and he was your favorite. And she was like, "Oh yes, I remember him."
Oh, nice, 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 nice. Yeah,
So
awesome
you
experience.
really did. That was some really beautiful work.
Thank you
Uh,
very
the
much.
specificity, especially of the characterization of when he's going into hiding, and just your specific choices were like from a voice and speech standpoint, were on point and exciting and precise.
I appreciate
But just for you, I guess some people might watch this, right? So I just want to make sure that uh, everything's clear. I have taken a leave of absence from Brown
it. Oh,
for the past year because I got so much professional work that I decided to take a leave, and I'm currently in negotiations with them about what my position will be moving forward, because I don't want to have such a large position anymore, because the professional career has, I want to pursue that for a little bit, but I also want to see if I can somehow manage to still be in a classroom from time to time. So we're working on trying to figure that part out. But you
yes.
know, uh, I'm looking forward to talking to you about diversity in voice and speech teaching, because it's a correction that has needed to happen for a long time,
Ah,
and and especially in the United States, but really anywhere where theater is being taught, because I think that the idea of what was considered, in quotes, good speech for the theater
mhm.
is something that has needed a correction, um, and that correction is happening slowly. But as we're starting to wake up a little bit, especially white people, um, and realize that the idea, it used to be that the idea for sort of baseline clear speech in the theater
Good
would
American.
be what was this, standard American was one term used, classical American speech is another term used, mid-Atlantic speech is used, and sometimes even transatlantic
Yeah.
speech is used. And those are all terms that are used to phrase this, to name this made up way of speaking that was primarily spoken by uh, white, rich people in the Northeast of the US. And it was kind of a copy of upper class white British speech, which is referred to as RP, or received pronunciation. So it's kind of like the American version of received pronunciation. And we were all taught that. I was taught that. I had a Southern accent when I started you know, when I went to acting school. They were like, you can't, that sounds uneducated. You can't speak that way. And so I got a version of what people of color get, but it's not nearly the same kind of thing that I think a lot of people of color have dealt with in the performing arts when training to be a classical actor,
Yes.
right? And I know you have experience with that.
Yes.
And you had the same kind of training I have, because I remember when I came to work with you the first time in Dallas, And, you know, we were doing Shakespeare, and I was like, well, he knows what to do. So,
Always been something, even though in my training, it was always something that kind of ate away at my spirit because there was a sensibility that how you sound is not right. And there's one way, like you said, there's one way to sound, there's good stage speech, and then who you are as a person, in some sensibilities to me, was kind of thwarted. I'll use that word,
totally.
pushed down. I've
Yeah.
even had directors say, just sound like an old white guy. I'm like, what? How can I possibly really do that? You know, and it offended me. I'm still dealing with the residual effects of that. That's why when I read that article, I was like, no, I got to talk to Thom, because one of the things that I admire so much.
I should have read that article. Did you send it to me?
I will, but yeah,
Okay, I should read that. Yeah.
sure. And I found it. I was like, oh, that's what I'm talking about right there. So I know
Right.
it's happening in the world of voice and speech training. So
Right.
one of the things that I really appreciated is when you worked with me on my dialect for lettuce and lunch. I mean,
Oh
one
yeah.
of the first things you sent me was an African speaking, you know, the British dialect. You even asked me, where do you think your family came from? I
Right.
was so all that sensibility of who I was as a person, being brought up, what African region did I come from, was incredible to you, or important to you, because you said it would give me certain tonal qualities. And
Yeah.
I dug that.
Yeah. Yeah. Everybody comes from somewhere. And, you know, I've had white Americans uh, say to me or look at me or ask me about British black people and not understanding that they actually have a British accent. And I
Mm.
was like, of course they do. I mean, we're a reflection of our environment. The way we speak is a reflection of our heritage, our ancestry, but also our environment. So, you know, if you raise your children, say you decided to move your kids to, I don't know, where did you raise your kids? Where did they grow up?
San Diego.
San Diego, right? Okay, so that's where you are now.
San Diego, some in Toronto.
Right, and some in Toronto. Okay, and they probably speak differently, don't they?
They do.
Yeah, because they're reflecting their environment. So you want to sound like your peers. You know, that happens on a certain level. But it depends upon how isolated the group is, right? So there was the great the northern migration of black people from the south to the north at the turn of the last century, and then again about 20 years later. And so, you know, why is it that black people that came up from the South and the North kind of maintained a Southern accent for a rather long time, or even on some level to this day? You'll hear Northern influences are taking over more and more now, but it was just simply because of segregation, you know. The more we're exposed to people's
Great. Come on.
different ways, the more we'll blend our sounds. But you know, it's a fascinating conversation. There's a movie. That movie came out about 2 years ago, maybe. Um, I'm going to get the title wrong, but it was something like "Sorry to Disturb You" or "Sorry to Bother You," or
Oh, I
it
remember.
was with
Yes,
Lakeith
yes, 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 yes. And it was
Stanfield in the
white.
lead.
I remember the movie. He was in his garage or something. Yes.
And he worked for like a telemarketing company,
Yes.
and he was encouraged to sound white when talking to people,
Yes.
doing the phone calls,
Right.
and it was really all about that. It's a fascinating film, kind of really speaks to what we're talking about.
So then,
So the
what
thing is,
say that this?
now in teaching voice and speech, go ahead, please.
No, I was going to say so.
You know I can talk now.
Evolution of vocal training. Then, when would you say that there was this like recognition of the diversity that was needed, as opposed to we're going to make everybody sound, and I'm going to say it, sound white. When would
Yeah,
that
say it, because that is what it was and
okay?
is. Yeah, I mean, absolutely say that. Whitewashing, as
Okay.
some people say too, or an idea of clarity, or an idea of what it means to sound educated, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I've been trying to really deconstruct clarity. What does it mean to be clear? You know, uh, exactly, because it was always, okay, well, you have to. It mainly has to do with consonants, the
I know.
everybody can afford to
So
use more
go back.
consonants.
But in and out. Blink. Blink.
But when did you catch all of that or some of
No.
that?
No.
You didn't catch any of that?
No.
Oh, well, good. Well, then I'll just I'll start over
Great.
and maybe answer your question, because I don't think I really did in that last thing I said that you didn't get. I think it started maybe about 10 years ago, where people started to where students, it really came from the students. And students started to say, all of the material we're working on in acting is from whites, and you're asking me to sound white, and this doesn't speak to my experience and doesn't even necessarily prepare me for what I'm going to be doing when I get out of here.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Yes, to a certain extent, they might do some classical plays because, they're cost effective. I mean, they don't, if you do a Shakespeare play, you don't have to pay any royalties.
Right.
Right? So people keep producing Shakespeare because it's cheaper, and also because we all receive so much of it in our education. People revere it and think it's good, and it is pretty good, frankly.
Right.
But it's not the only thing. And so I started to investigate that with students, and the problem with the phonetics, right? So the IPA, the phonetic alphabet, that was started by British and French back in the 19th century. And so a lot of the standard ideas for the different symbols and the sounds that go with the symbols come from white, well-educated, rich, because they're well-educated, right? They and usually that's rich people.
Right.
British, white British people that were well-educated. And so those sort of standard sounds were set up that way. So when teaching the phonetics, which is a great tool for understanding or organizing what you hear, we would start with them as an ideal of a standard, which came from that British speech. And as Americans, what we did was we altered it slightly so that it could be something in between British and American,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
But that was leaving a lot of people out of the equation, wasn't it?
Right.
So,
exactly.
yeah.
Exactly.
So now what we do is we teach the phonetics so that everybody understands. We teach the phonetics so that everybody understands the tools that we're working with. And then I have just I teach everything. Whatever you need for the role, we teach it. And I try to make sure that I have a wide variety of accents and dialects I'm teaching. I look at the group I'm teaching, and according to who's in my class, as far as what will be useful to them. And everybody learns everything, right? So if I'm teaching a section on RP, then everybody learns RP. And I make sure that there are samples of people when I give the material. There are samples of people that look like me,
Mm-hmm.
or you, or whatever, look like the student.
Yes.
And that, like you mentioned earlier about the stuff I sent you for your work on RP, I wanted to make sure that there were people of color that were speaking that way so that you wouldn't feel like you were having to do a white accent.
Right.
It doesn't necessarily belong to, a
right. Oh, my internet.
It's a way of speaking. I had somebody ask me once. I had somebody ask me once. Because of what I do, I get asked these questions, and I'm always like, "Ooh, that tells me a lot about your opinions about things, right?" But I
Hmm.
had a white person ask me once, "So, doing what you do, is it that the way we speak comes from our genetics?"
Mm.
And I was like, "No, it's not true. The way we speak is reflective of, you know, what we grew up here, what was around us in childhood, up until the time of puberty. And then things get relatively fixed
Hmm.
at that point, right? So if you want to change your way of speaking after puberty, it takes much more effort. But if you were to move from one place to another before you became a man or a woman, um, then what you would just change, and you would quite possibly, if you went between the two places, be able to just flip in between the two sounds. There was a young British actor I coached recently, an American, and he was just flipping in and out of his into British with no, like, he talked to his dad in British and then he'd flip into American, and it's because he learned to speak American. They moved here when he was a young kid, and
Hmm.
so when he's at home with his folks, he kind of sounds British, and when he's out in the world in the United States, he just does American because it's easier.
Right.
Yeah.
Is there now some way that is there a new title for standard American, or is it just now it's more inclusive in the realms of the teaching of it, but the title is still the same?
I think we're still calling it standard American, but I'm just making sure that I talk to the students about the history of that, and that it is actually, the history of it's not great, that it's on some level, you know, reflective of whites, and on it, I'm not on some level, it is reflective of white supremacy,
Right.
and that we're going to call that out, but let's not throw out the baby with the bathwater, because this is actually going to help you, because it's a way of speaking that sits between American and British speech. There are certain structures that you have to learn that are more British when you learn standard American speech for the stage, like things like marry, carriage, right? Spirit, those things, those aren't typically American. Most typical Americans would say married, carriage, spirit, where the R is overtaking to the point where the first vowel is not clear, right? When you learn standard American or RP or British accents, right, that structure is clearer: spirit, carriage. You know these things. You learned all this stuff.
Yes.
Um, the reason the argument I have for wanting to continue to teach those structures is because anywhere that Great Britain, or that the English colonized in the world,
Ah.
uses those structures as well.
Mm.
So if you're you should learn them in your speech training at the beginning. So if you ever have to do Jamaican, or if you ever have to do Nigerian, or if you ever have to do
South Africa.
Irish, or I could go South African, I could go on, and it could be, it's all over the world, right? The Northeast in the US is the place that uses those same structures as well. You would never hear a New Yorker say, a New Yorker from the city, right? Because we're talking about the coastal sound. You would never hear a New Yorker say carry. They would say carry. It's a more open sound,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
So they actually have some, or horrible, right? That would be very New York. It's but it would sound New York, so they would go horrible, right? But you would
Horrible.
hear that structure, as opposed to probably, you probably grew up saying, as did I, horrible,
Horrible. Yes, horrible.
right? As opposed to horrible. And
Yes.
a British person would say horrible. Oh, that's horrible,
Hmm.
right? So horrible, horrible, right? Horrible,
Yeah.
right? If I'm doing something kind of, West African,
Yes.
right? This is horrible. It
Yeah.
wouldn't be horrible. It would be horrible, right? That kind of a thing. So,
Cool, cool, cool. Now,
Yeah.
it's interesting that
Sorry, that's such a long answer, but complicated. Yeah.
I wanted to speak to you because it is this whole thing about speech and actors and people of color, being within that realm of the world. It's a long issue that's gone on. I've been out of grad school since '92. I'm an
Right.
old man now,
Yeah.
and there's still a little edge with me dealing with speech. I have to be honest about it. It is, and I encounter sometimes certain things where it brings it up. And I'm like, no, the world is larger than that now. There's more brown and black people that are included on this stage, and they need to be recognized as well. So that's where I go with that. I want to ask, I find it interesting because I was like, with all of this work that you do with film and television, and I was wondering, the workload for you must be in work overload.
Well, I was until this thing happened.
Shut us
I was
down.
having a I was really
Yes. Oh man, my internet. I keep getting you. It's like we're on a
down,
CNN
and
news cover.
oh, that's all right.
Okay.
But yeah, it's been a good time. Last year I did I had like 10 different jobs in film and television and was running all over North America. So it was good period. And I was getting ready to go into another job right before, supposed to happen just a week or two after this shut everything down.
Mm-hmm.
Was supposed to go to Toronto to work on a new TV show for FX called Why, The Last Man. And I was going to be working with a few of the actors, one of which is the woman named Lashana Lynch, who is a really wonderful British actor who played the second female lead in Captain Marvel.
Uh-huh.
And that's how I got to know her. Captain Marvel was a Marvel picture.
Yeah,
Superhero.
Big money.
Yeah, and she's fantastic and does a great American accent. And I'm really glad that she feels she needs my help because I can help her, but she does it really well. So
nice,
it's cool.
Nice.
She's the new 007 also.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
Now I see you were working on, are you worked on, I don't know if it's done, I don't know where it is, the Aretha Franklin movie.
Yeah, in fact, that was what I just finished about 3 weeks before we got shut down.
Oh, wow.
I was having a nice little vacation and then I was going to go do something else. And then the vacation has now gotten extended.
So what about coming out of this? Are those things still on,
Well, we were finished shooting. So our director, Liesl Tommy, and I believe you know Liesl, don't you?
I worked with her.
Yeah, I thought so.
Yeah.
And this was Liesl's first feature.
I know. Nice.
Right. And she got the big guns, let me tell you. I mean, it was MGM and we had a nice, a good solid budget and really strong cast. You mentioned some of them at the beginning of our conversation. And so that was really fun. I mean, helping Jennifer Hudson create Aretha Franklin was like, I felt like a kid in the candy shop. I really did.
Yeah.
First of all, she's an extraordinary person, just beautiful soul.
Nice.
Deeply devout. And which is just a pleasure to be around because there's her faith also has no judgment of others, right? So she's devout, but without the judgment that can sometimes come with devout people.
Yes.
I don't get that from her at all. And so I felt invited to participate in my spirituality.
Nice. Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing
that was a great gift.
I'm looking forward
but she just sings the heck out of it, of course. But to help her go from, she grew up in the South Side of Chicago and has a very strong sort of South Side Chicago kind of sound. Very vowel oriented, not very consonant oriented. And Aretha grew up in Detroit, but her dad was, C.L. Franklin was a very famous preacher from
Right.
the deep South, from Mississippi, and came from the tradition of you would go to seminary and you would learn how to speak.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I know you're familiar, but he
Hmm.
had that brilliant old school preacher kind of speak where everything is pronounced
Yeah.
and almost overspoken. You know what I mean? Just like, better than the Queen of England. You know
Yes.
what I mean? And Aretha grew up with that. So Aretha had speech that was like that. Aretha spoke very clearly and the ends of the words were pronounced and that kind of. So speech job for Jennifer to adopt that was, very kind of 1960s and a female of that time.
Yeah.
Women were not treated equally then, nor are they now for that matter.
Struggle
But,
continues.
yeah.
All areas.
But it's interesting. There you go. I mean, speech tells a story,
Yeah.
tells history, it's a lot.
It's a lot. Well, Thom, I thank you for taking out the time in your busy day.